Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and this is my weekly wrap up plus my August recap. It is Tuesday evening and I have a couple books to talk about that I have read. So this first part of this wrap up is going to be what I read this week, which, well, maybe a few books. And then I will kind of recap all of my reading for the whole month of August and wrap that up as well. But for this week, so far, what I read, I finished reading this One Day at a Time by Kyle Idleman, which I have been reading all summer long as a devotional. And let's get the bookmark tassel out of the way there. This was very good, very challenging. I think that I would probably disagree with Kyle Idleman on some finer points of things, but in his overall message and in the challenge he is giving in this book, 100% agree with, and it was really good for me. It's all about seeing people as Jesus sees them, seeing their need and being willing to meet that need, being willing to interact with people on a deeply personal level and in a loving way, like Jesus did, ministering to people. It was a very good challenge for me. I think many people who, like myself, are introverted and tend to withdraw into self. It's really difficult to get outside of yourself and be willing to take a risk, a relationship risk, and to interact with someone that you don't know very well. And yet that is the whole idea, right? That we're supposed to be reaching out to people, whether we know them or not. Just fly. And then the other issue is, just the basic sinful human nature, which is selfish and proud at its core. And so we are also fighting against that natural tendency in our relationships with each other. So this was very good. I loved his approach. And his sense of humor and everything. So it was a good devotional. It was a good devotional and at its core, very biblical. But I will say one other issue that I had with it was that there wasn't a great deal of actual biblical foundation for each day's devotion. I mean, overall, a very biblical concept, but he didn't start each devotion with a particularly biblical thought per se. And each devotion wasn't necessarily founded on any particular scripture or anything like that. So there were a lot of interesting anecdotes. There were personal stories. There were illustrations. There were stories of true characters and Christians and other people to illustrate his points. But it wasn't always based on scripture. So that is one thing that is a bit of a downside. But the good thing for me was that in the summer, I do more Bible study based things as well. So this was kind of like just a quick read in the morning, just a couple of short little pages. And then I also was delving into more Bible study over the summer because I have more time for that. So I didn't feel like I was missing out on that. And it is only, like a 60-day thing. So it's not like you're never going to get a diet of the word, but it was a little bit of a failing in that respect. And then the other book that I finished was Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell, which I was buddy reading with Kelly. Kelly reads a lot. And it was very good. So I have now read all of her. Sorry, didn't have my phone on a tripod. I'm just holding it. So I apologize if we're like wavering around and stuff. I have one more full-length novel by Gaskell to read, which is Sylvia's Lovers. So I do want to read that and soon, because now I'm so close I'll be able to say I've read all of her major novels. Then I have a whole bunch of her novellas and shorter stories that I want to read. But it was very good. And most recently, the work that I read by her, besides one of her novellas, the most recent full-length novel by her that I read was Wives and Daughters, which was very good. That one was probably a little bit more complex in its storyline and characters. This one was a more straightforward, obvious message point that Gaskell was trying to make. And I don't think that the characters were as complex. However, sorry, I live near a local airport, and so like the little planes fly over my head, and those little planes, because they're like lower, they're way noisier than regular planes. Anyway, what was I saying? Elizabeth Gaskell, Ruth. So I really loved the message that Gaskell was trying to share with this story. And her message was particularly pointed and applicable for the Victorian era in which she was writing, but it's a timeless message for all of us. And basically her point was, how do we treat someone who has sinned? How do we treat that? How do we treat them? How do we interact with them? And she explores this by having a main character who is not necessarily a willful sinner. So there is that. Ruth is as much a victim of a predatory man as she is a sinner. I mean, we're all at the baseline, we're all sinners, right? But in this particular story, Ruth is much more the victim of a predatory man than she is a willful sinner herself. So it's the story of what happens to Ruth because she makes really bad choices, but she is unprotected and vulnerable and innocent and naive at the beginning of the story, and that leads her into trouble because she doesn't really know what she's getting herself into. And so she ends up in trouble. And then there is all the fallout of that as the story goes on. And Elizabeth Gaskell examines a variety of people's response to her from that point. And it's clear from the story how Elizabeth Gaskell feels like this sort of situation should be handled by the church, by believers, by Christians. And it's really a masterful exploration of that. It is very pointed, though. So in that sense, like, you know, Elizabeth Gaskell, she has a point that she wants to drive home, and she's using her story to illustrate that. And it's very much, in a sense, like a type of parable, I guess, in that way. And so also it does have like the typical Victorian moralistic overtones, although with Gaskell, I find it much more palatable than, like, for example, Charlotte M. Young or even Louisa May Alcott. I find I can't read too much of that very heavy-handed moralistic writing at a time, because so often, like, the dialogue gets bogged down by the point the author's trying to make. And so there's a lot of telling rather than showing that happens. And Gaskell is much more subtle with that than those other authors that I mentioned. But it is still there. It's still there, but it's just not as heavy-handed as some of those other Victorian authors. And you can get very, very engrossed in her story and in the characters. And she really does an excellent job of describing their emotions. There were quite a few scenes with multiple different characters where they had these very wrenching, soul-searching times where they were almost overcome with an emotion of one kind or another, and or there were very difficult things that they had to work through emotionally and mentally, and that was really well done, I felt. I don't remember if her other books have significant scenes like that, but this one had several scenes that were kind of like pivotal ones for characters where they were going through something that was either traumatic or life-changing for them, and they had to wrestle with something, you know, like kind of like Jacob meeting the angel kind of moments. And those were just described really well. The ending was gut-wrenching. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to spoil anything. It was gut-wrenching. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about the ending. I think I would have preferred a different ending. And I'm not sure that I feel like the ending was necessary the way it was written. However, the book overall was very satisfactory, and I really feel like it's an important message of grace and God's grace working through people, and how God's grace and love can reach and change people and build them up and edify them if we, as we allow it to flow through us to people. So it was a great challenge to me. It was one of those really powerful empathy building books that I think would be a valuable book for any Christian to read. Whether or not you have read anything by Gaskell, I do think that you would enjoy reading the story of Ruth. I don't think it was difficult to read it all. You know, I know a lot of times Victorian literature can be really dense, but I don't think this one is. There are not any lengthy, like, descriptive passages. There is a lot of emotional tension. There is some drama. And, you know, there's the typical complexity that you would find in Victorian writing, but it's not difficult. So I recommend it highly. Yeah, of all of the books I've read by Elizabeth Gaskell, of her main novels, I would say it maybe even feels a little bit less like you're reading classic Victorian literature. It's more approachable, maybe a little bit. I don't know. Those are my initial thoughts. I just finished it last night, so it does need a little time to stew and simmer. And I might change my thoughts on that, but that's where I'm standing right now with it. So today I had orientation at work, and tomorrow is the first day of school. So I'm currently reading The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh by Claudia Gray, and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm about halfway through now, and I will finish that one up this week, hopefully, unless school saps all of my time and ability to read. And then what's on deck is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. That's the next thing I am hoping to pick up. So I will be starting that one probably tonight, and we'll see how far I get it. I may or may not finish it before the week's out. We'll see how much time I have to devote to that one. So that's what's going on, and I will check back with you. I will check back in with you later this week. Stay. Okay, apologies if the air and the engine sound are really loud because I turned the fan down a little. I had to turn my car on because I need to keep my I'm struggling. I need to keep my phone plugged in and charging. So I was supposed to meet my sister for dinner, and I'm going to in a minute here on Thursday evening. And I had a little bit of extra time to kill, and I was right near the library, so I ran into the library, and then the skies erupted in a massive, severe thunderstorm while I was in there. So I got stuck in the library for like half an hour. And, you know, that's so sad. I mean, really, what a horrible place to be stuck in a thunderstorm. Anyway, I browsed through their books for sale, and I got a bunch. I have not been buying a lot of books lately because I was trying to get rid of books. And so, yeah, I have been very careful about only picking up books that are actually on my definite wanting to read in the nearest future, not theoretical, someday I might read this sort of books. So I found a few books. So for 50 cents, I found this nice, practically, it seems like brand new copy of And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, which is the next Agatha Christie that I want to read. I've only read 2 so far. I know. But I want to read this one. This is the next one I want to read. So I got that for 50 cents. And then, does anybody know if there are any regular running Agatha Christie readathons or challenges? Let me know, because that would be a good time to read it. Or like mystery challenges, let me know. And then I got 2 books, which, okay, this is interesting. Sorry, I have to hold on my phone, so it's gonna be awkward here. But so first of all, Emily's Quest, which is book 2 or 3 in the series. I don't know, whatever. Oh, 3rd. It's the 3rd one in the Emily series, the trilogy. And then this is Emily Climbs, which is the 2nd book in the series. They did not have the 1st. I am wanting to read/reread everything by L.M. Montgomery. I'm sure I've read these before, but I remember nothing about them because I read it when I was young. So I want to reread them. So I need to get the 1st one somewhere. The other thing is, these are both Bantam books published, but one is clearly older than the other, like an older edition. Interestingly though, the font is the same for the titles. And I think they probably used the same painting here in this one as from the more vintage edition, but they have it like framed in this purple color. But then this one is older and is just the painting. And it looks like, I don't know, like it's from the 70s or 80s maybe. Let's see, printing history. This edition is 1983. So this one is what I remember, like from the 90s era, I think. Let's see. Yeah, 1993, 10 years later. So they were both there, same publishing company, but 10 years apart in their publishing. So anyway, I need to get the 1st one so I can read those. Those were all 50 cents each, those paperbacks. And then I read my first, I know guys, I'm not really into mysteries. That's the thing. So I read my first that I know of, Sherlock Holmes earlier this year, and I really enjoyed it. I read The Hound of the Baskervilles. I'm actually quite sure that I have read Sherlock Holmes before. I don't remember which ones. I don't remember much about it at all. And it also may have been like a children's version. And obviously, I'm familiar with Sherlock Holmes, but I want to read more of them as an adult. So I got this one, which has, it's a Barnes & Noble Classics hardcover. So that was $2. And then I just picked up a cookbook. I try to pick up keto cookbooks whenever I can. So I can have easy recipes on hand. But a lot of times, like I get them used and then I look through them, and a lot of times I don't end up keeping them. So we'll see what happens. But this one, it's easy and 5 ingredient recipes. So I thought that could be very useful. So the rain is picking up again, of course. So that was my little haul. Update on reading. So I haven't finished anything, but I don't have too much left. I have about 50 pages left in the Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. So I will be sharing an update on that as soon as I'm done with that. I'll be filming that. So I won't say anything about that, but I made a mistake. In my last clip, I said that the next book I would be picking up would be Fahrenheit 451, but I forgot that I had already drawn a card for the DeckofTBRathon, and that was a 10, and I needed to read a book. That one was based on ratings, so I needed to read a book either that was rated lower than 3 or higher than 4 or had fewer than 1,000 ratings. And of the books on my TBR that I wanted to choose from, the only one that qualified, like, several of them that I really wanted to read next were like 3.9 or 3.8 or 3.5 were their ratings. So they were in that window. They didn't qualify for this prompt. And the only one that did qualify of the books that I wanted to get to was Five Little Peppers and How They Grew, which was a children's classic for the Read Your Classics or Read the Classics challenge that I do. So that will help me get caught up with the August children's one, so that I'm only behind on the July dystopian, which is Fahrenheit 451. So really, I'm reading the August book for that challenge instead of the July book for that challenge, so it's fine. So I'm reading Five Little Peppers and How They Grew, and I'm reading it only at work because the book is old and it's fragile and I don't want to bring it back and forth. So I'm reading it. That sounded funny. I'm reading it only at work. Truly, I do work at work. I mean, I read it at my lunch break at work. So on my lunch break, I've been reading it. So I'm on like chapter 5 or something like that. And oh my goodness, I'm really, really loving it. Way more than I expected. It's a really sweet children's story. And it has made me laugh out loud. And it has made me cry. Like tears coming out of my eyes crying. And hoping that the other people who are working and doing lesson planning in the teacher room are not paying attention to the tears falling out of my eyes because I was crying. And in the chapter I just read, they're all getting the measles. And so now they're worried about Polly, the oldest girl, if her measles case is going to affect her eyesight. So I don't know yet if it's going to be a permanent diminution of her sight. So we'll see what happens. I'm really enjoying it. I'm kind of bummed that I brought it to work, because now I really don't want to bring it back and forth, because I don't want to risk the wear and tear on it. But that means tomorrow's Friday. I'll read a chapter or two on my lunch break, but then I won't be able to read it on the weekend. I'll have to wait till the next week. Or maybe I should just bring it home then and then keep it at home and bring something else to work to read in my lunch break. Maybe I'll do that, because I really do want to read some more of that. Anyway, so it looks like the rain has abated somewhat, so I'm going to head off to meet my sister, and I'll have at least one more clip when I'm done reading The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. It is now Sunday evening, and normally my weekly reading wrap-up goes live Sunday morning, but because I did my poetry pop-up this morning, and I hope that you had a chance to watch that, I instead am putting my weekly reading wrap-up for Monday. And also, this is going to be my August recap. So I will just briefly, after I finish telling you about the books I read this past week, I will tell you a little bit about how my whole month of August went, just to overview how I did on my various challenges, etc. In my last clip, I was telling you about the 5 Little Peppers. And I don't know where... Okay, it's so cute. I had to get it to show it to you while I'm talking about it. So, The 5 Little Peppers and How They Grew by Margaret Sidney. And I was surprised by how much I thoroughly enjoyed this. Now, Margaret Sidney, I think that she wrote a little bit after Louisa May Alcott. She lived in the same area as Louisa May Alcott in Concord, Massachusetts, at least for part of her life. In fact, I believe that she lived just down the street from the Alcott family, at least from where their house was. I don't know that they were ever there at the same time. But anyway, she wrote a couple of decades after Louisa May Alcott wrote, and this book obviously had some inspiration from Little Women, in my opinion. I just saw several parallels. There is a poor family. The father is not in the picture. I don't know that we get an explanation of what happened to him. And they are benefited by a wealthy older gentleman who takes a fancy to the youngest girl in the family and her sweet nature. And in the end, the whole family is, he kind of becomes a benefactor to the whole entire family. So there are definitely some similarities. There are 5 children rather than 4, and they're not all girls. There are 2 girls and 3 boys. And there are some other, like, it's not the same story, clearly. It's just definitely has some echoes of Little Women, let's put it that way. But it is so charming, and the antics of the children, they are so lifelike and realistic. Obviously, it seemed to me, I don't know much about Margaret Sidney, I believe that was a pen name, but it seemed to me that she had some familiarity with the behavior of children, young children, and the interactions of siblings, because that is very well portrayed here. It's just so funny. I was laughing out loud at some points, and I was also crying. I think that I mentioned that in my previous clip. There were parts of this that just moved me to tears. And it's just very sweet. There are, even though there are sections that move you to tears, even though there are parts of the story where they go through hard times, even though life is hard for the Peppers, all in all, it's not a tragic, sad, dramatic story. Just overall, it's just very sweet and charming and delightful and so easy to read. It was just wonderful fun to read, and I really enjoyed thoroughly reading the 5 Little Peppers. So I would love to read the other books in this series. I think there are a dozen books altogether. I don't know if I'll get to all of them, but I kind of want to see. There's definitely the oldest girl, oldest Pepper, Polly is her name, and then the son of the man who becomes their benefactor. And in the end, they end up being, well, I don't want to spoil it. I mean, it's, 160 years old. I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But there is a fun twist in the story. But anyways, the son of the man who becomes their benefactor, he and Polly, it's obvious that there's an interest in the other, but they're young, they're just children at the beginning of
this story. So I would be curious to see where she takes that, kind of like similar to Lori and Joe. So anyway, that was such a fun read, and I'm so glad that I read it. Some parts of it seemed vaguely familiar to me. Like I may have read it when I was a child, which is entirely possible. I was a voracious reader and I read all kinds of things. I checked all kinds of things out of the library. I read whatever books we had in our house. So it's entirely possible that I read it at some point and just, it didn't stick out to me in my childhood, like some other books may have. But there definitely seemed like familiar things about it. So probably I read it. But in the end, I gave it 5 stars, really enjoyed it. And then I also read The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, which was a wonderful cozy mystery. And it was the last book that I read for the SummerBook Bingo and for the DeckofTBRathon. And again, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with that one. I ended up giving it 4 stars. So The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh is a cozy mystery set in England in the Regency times with Austen characters, which is the fun part. And I really loved, as I demonstrated to you before, I read, even when I was only a few chapters in, I read a paragraph or 2 from the opening of the book. I loved the prose style. It flowed so well, and yet it was definitely echoing Jane Austen style, mimicking Jane Austen style of writing, or writing in general from that era. And so it was fun to read in that way. And I felt like it was very well done. Like it wasn't overdone or underdone. It seemed just right to me, the prose was. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And then, so I'm just realizing I have like hair sticking out, but it's kind of distracting me, so I hope it doesn't distract you. Anyways, it wasn't overdone or underdone, but well done. And I enjoyed the characters. I felt like she stayed true. She wasn't trying to deviate from the way the characters were portrayed by Jane Austen. She was maybe trying to give them some different nuances, or maybe a different side of them than we may have seen in Austen's novels. For example, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, she's definitely humanizing her a little bit and raising a little more compassion for her in your mind in this story. And I thought it was well done. It didn't depart from Austen's. It doesn't totally change her character. She's still the very austere, stern, commanding, and demanding kind of person. But you see another side of her as well. And then Anne de Bourgh, she's a very one-dimensional character. She's not the main story in Pride and Prejudice. So she becomes much more fleshed out, again, much more human, like you get to know her a little bit. And that one, maybe a lot more imagination was used because we don't know much about her in Pride and Prejudice. So some of that is definitely, Claudia Gray's imagination about who Anne de Bourgh really was. And about all of this is imagining the future lives of the characters as they were presented in Austen's actual novels. And so the detectives who are solving the case are Henry Tilney and Catherine Morland's daughter. Oh, good heavens. Cannot remember the name that they gave her. Totally forget. And then Jonathan Darcy, who is the oldest son of Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. Now, in this book, I don't know in the other books if we are introduced at all. Apparently, he has 2 brothers, but very little is said about him. And they don't appear on page anywhere in this story. What was interesting to me was she obviously was giving Jonathan Darcy some aspects of being on the autistic spectrum and being neurodivergent in this story. And I thought it was pretty well done, but there was a lot more telling than showing. And that would be one of the drawbacks for me of this story. I really wish that that idea had been executed a little more fully. I know multiple people personally and very well who are on the autistic spectrum and who are neurodivergent in one way or another. And I feel like the mannerisms and obviously they vary widely from person to person, but I felt like in this book, the author would say certain aspects of Jonathan Darcy's character and how he thought about things, but then everything in his speech and for the most part his interactions with people were not representative of that in any way. So the way he actually was interacting with people did not match up with what was said about him, if that makes sense. So I feel like that could have been a little bit better executed, but I felt like it was a really great idea. And I would love to see more exploration of that. And there also was a character in the story who had epilepsy, which at that time was apparently called the falling sickness. And that was interesting as well to see that portrayed and how they were dealing with it at that time. Perhaps a little bit unrealistic on the part of the reactions of some people for that time, but it didn't take away from the story for me personally. That was honestly a smaller part of the story as a whole, so it didn't detract too much. The other thing that kept it from being a 5-star for me was that it did move very slowly. And what I'm seeing from the reviews is that the first 2 books in the series, because this is the 3rd book in the series, the first 2 books in the series I think may move a little bit faster. This one gets a little more bogged down in the details of interpersonal relationships and the characters in the story and delving into their personal lives, etc. And so the mystery takes a little bit of a backseat and takes a really long time to solve. And I was thinking that the 2 main characters who are supposed to be solving it, they were questioning people and interviewing people that were suspects, but they were not looking into any evidence at all. They did a little bit. They looked into one thing, like they looked into the weapons room, the gun room, and maybe one other thing, but there were so many other aspects of the mystery that they could have gone and looked at physical evidence, but they didn't. So they were just relying on people talking to them and their own reasoning abilities and thinking logically through what they knew, and they kept getting dead ends and getting literally nowhere in the case. So they got really bogged down with that for a long time, and it's like they were just spinning wheels and nothing was happening, and that part, it made it drag a little bit at times, to be honest. But still I gave it 4 stars because it was definitely a fun read. Those were the books that I read in August. So now for recap of August. I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, if you include the devotional that I finished, that I talked about before, 12 books in August, which actually, in the end, is pretty good considering that there was a solid week and a half or 2 weeks where I got very little reading done. Now, a couple of these books I had been working on through the summer, so particularly the nonfiction books. So they weren't just read in August. I finished them up. And one, Evermore, was a novella. And I Must Betray You was a YA book, which was easier to read. And Northanger Abbey was a graphic novel, so it was very short. So some of them were not as long as others. So those were easier to read. So in all, I read, let's see, 1, 2, 3 5-stars, which were Five Little Peppers, The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon, Volume 4, and I Must Betray You by Ruth Pettis. Definitely solid 5 stars for all of those. And a couple of books got really close. For a Lifetime by Gabrielle Meyer, I gave 4.5 stars. And Ruth also was 4.5 stars. And Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell. And then The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh was a 4-star, as was, there was another one. Yes, How to Study Your Bible by Kay Arthur. And I don't have this in here, but I would say that the devotional I read, I'd probably give it 4 stars also. And then I had 3 or 3.5 stars. Jane Austen's First Love by Siri James, and Always and Evermore, the books by Jodi Headland. Always was the novella, and then Evermore was the book, the first book in this series. And then the graphic novel Northanger Abbey, I gave 3 stars. And yeah, those are the books that I read. So I participated in a couple of challenges in August. The first one was the first half of August, and that was the Ketchupathon by Books and Jams, and I believe Sarah's Nightstand. And in that one, let's see, I'll show you I spread here. So I read 5 books for that one. How that one worked was all the prompts were so that you were planning your backyard barbecue sort of thing. And so you picked one of 3 different prompts for each category, and then that determined what your barbecue was going to be. So, and it's set so that you can finish up your Book of the Month Club books, which I'm not in the Book of the Month Club, So I just wanted to read books for my TBR. So that's how I did that one. So for location, mine was at the beach because the book I read was set in a different country, and that was Evermore by Jody Headland. And I didn't have any guests at my party because I didn't read a book that fit any of those categories in the first 2 weeks of August. The categories were family focus, a found family, or neighborhood. And I mean, I guess if I wanted to double up one of those other books, something would probably work, but I think you weren't supposed to double up. But anyway, so I didn't have any guests at my party. It's just me at the beach. And yeah, that's fine. I don't mind. And then, I'm an introvert anyway. And then the food was, the main dish was steak, burgers and dogs, or shish kebabs. I ended up with burgers and dogs because I read historical fiction, which was Jane Austen's First Love by Siri James. And then you pick two sides. I ended up with chips for the shortest book, which was Always by Jody Headland, which was a novella. And then mac and cheese, Two People on the Cover, was for A Lifetime by Gabrielle Meyer. And then a free choice was dessert. And that was a book that just didn't fit anywhere else. And that was Northanger Abbey, which was a graphic novel. And then for the games, if you filled 3 activity prompts, the game was volleyball. And so I did. I read outside, I participated in reading sprints, and I did a buddy read in August. So Ruth was one of my buddy reads. That was with Kelly at Kelly Reads a Lot. And we had a great time reading Ruth together. So my barbecue bash was with myself at the beach, burgers and dogs, probably just a hamburger, and chips and mac and cheese. I mean, you know, it's a pretty typical barbecue meal. And dessert, probably s'mores. And I played volleyball with myself. That was a lot of fun. Okay, so then the Deck of TBRathon, which was so much fun. This is my spread for that one. And I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This was a DNF. So that was 8 books that ended up reading for that one with 5, 6, 11, 16, 21, 24, 27, 28 points altogether. My picks for that one were Jane Austen's First Love. I drew a 9, which was an object on the cover. It was supposed to be a building on the cover for 5 points. And then I drew a number 4, and that was a long book over 400 pages. So For a Lifetime was just over 400 pages. And then I drew a king, and for 5 points, I was supposed to read a rarely read genre for me. And so that was Always, which was kind of like a young adult, fantastical-ish historical fiction. And then I drew a 2, and I got 5 points for reading a book with the same letter of the author's last name. So it was the same author. So that worked. Got 5 points for that one. And then another rarely read genre, and that was Northanger Abbey with a graphic novel. And then for 8, I drew an 8. That was a book in a series. So to continue a series, I read Emma M. Lyon Volume 4, and that was 3 points. And then I drew another 8 again. So I read The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, which was also in the middle of a series. And then I drew a 10, and that was Goodreads, a high rating over 4 stars. So I read Five Little Peppers and How They Grew, which was just over 4 stars. So that was the Deck of TBRathon, which was so fun. And finally, we get to the end of SummerBook Bingo, and I did a blackout. So I was very happy about that. That was my goal. And at the beginning of the summer, I wasn't sure that that was going to happen, but it did. Now, the books that I actually read for this did not end up being the ones that I thought that I would be reading at the beginning, but I did get all of the blocks filled out. And the last 2, I don't remember what other ones that I had, but I know the last 2 that I filled out were the graphic novel, which was the Northanger Abbey, and the cozy mystery, which was The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. This is where I stand with my books tracker. So I only have 1 more shelf. So I'm doing really well because those are the only books I need to read in September, October, November, and December. So pretty sure I'm going to have to be drawing more books on this shelf and filling in more. Let's see if I accomplished any other goals in the month of August. Well, for nonfiction reads, I did add another one, How to Study Your Bible by Kate Arthur. And I also have not written that in there, but the devotional that I read, One Day at a Time, also would fit there. And I also read 2024 releases, which I'm doing really well on, For a Lifetime by Gabrielle Meyer. And the next one that I want to read in 2024 is The Muse of Maiden Lane. I'm not sure if there are any other books being published this year that I really want to read, enough to put on this list. We'll see. I'm not sure what else is coming up the rest of the year. I know I've heard a bunch of things, but I'm not sure if there any of them are like, oh yes, I must read that this year. We'll see. And let me see. I added 5-star reads, but I already talked about those. And there was a DNF, which was Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Amanda Flowers. And I talked about that earlier in this clip, so don't need to say any more about that. Actually, I think I mentioned that in my last week wrap up. And didn't do any rereads. I need to get on those because I have quite a few left for 2024 that I do want to read. So I need to get on that. As for Big Book Summer, I didn't add anything in August for that. I wanted to read the rest of, I wanted to finish And the Dead Shall Rise, but that did not happen. And yeah, so it's probably going to take me to the end of the year to read that one. It's just taking so long. Did not read enough in August to pick that one up. So for the Read Your Shelf Challenge with Chantel Reads All Day, I read Jane Austen's First Love by Siri James, and that was for Doyle, read a book with a house on a cover. So that book had a house on a cover. And for the Tea and Ink Society for August, I was supposed to read a children's classic, and I did. So I still need to read the dystopian for July, but I started that. I'm doing a buddy read currently with Catherine at Read Your Love and Jeanette at Jane Reads. So we are reading Fahrenheit 451 this week. So that will be done, and then I will be caught up, and I'm going to be reading Cymbeline. Is it Cymbeline or Cymbeline? I've heard it different ways, so I'm not sure which is correct. By Shakespeare? That I will read in September, so I'll be caught up with that. So that is my progress for the month of August in all of my challenges. I do want to peek real quick. I'm always curious, like, how it compares what I actually read with my TBR. So let me look at my TBR notes and see if I actually read what I said I would read in August. So Five Little Peppers, check. Hillbilly Elegy, no, I did not get to that. And the Dead Shall Rise, no. Ruth, yes, was a buddy read. Jane Austen's First Love, yes. Now these were all options, possible options for SummerBook Bingo. Listening Valley, no, I did not get to that. I Must Betray You, yes. In Search of a Prince, no. Although I do want to read that this week because I'm going to a book festival in the area on Saturday, and Tony Shiloh will be there, also Kathy Golke. So I want to read In Search of a Prince, and then I downloaded on Kindle Unlimited a book by Kathy Golke, so I'm hoping to read both of those this week before Saturday. And also Fahrenheit 451. We'll see. Happiness for Beginners by Catherine Center, no. Flower Fables, yes, but I read that in July before August actually started. And then Thursday Murder Club, no. And For a Lifetime, yes. So my actual reads ended up looking very different from the plan, but I did get some good reading in. Lots of 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, 1 DNF. I'm pretty happy. And I read more than I thought I would, given the time constraints that I had and my busy schedule. So that was my August recap and my reading wrap up from this past week. So I hope that you have a good week of reading ahead of you, and that you enjoy whatever you're reading, and that you have all the 5 stars in the world. Let me know what your favorite book was in August, and also your thoughts on any of the books I read, if you agree or disagree on my thoughts about them or my ratings or anything really. Just give me your thoughts in the comments. And I almost forgot. I have one more giveaway winner to announce. So I have my trusty little mug. Last week in my weekly reading wrap up, I announced that I was going to give someone either a book from their wish list or a gift card to Amazon or Thrift Books. So I'm going to choose the winner here. So have all the names written from the comments in here. So if you can read my, oh, I think that this is Greta Anderson. This is the second time that she has won one of my giveaways. I promise I did not rig that. So Greta Anderson, again, I'll be getting in touch with you and arranging for you to get your prize. And so that is the end of my August, the official end of my August celebration of my first anniversary on BookTube. And here's to another wonderful year together with you. Bye.